It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Thursday, May 16th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that is talking draft eligible forwards today.
All right, let's do it.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here with prospect expert Russ Cohen, who's on all your favorite social media apps at Sportsology. We are at Locked On Flyers on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. You can find us over on YouTube. We're on the SiriusXM app or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Russ, last week at this time, we talked about the first round defensemen according to your rankings. And today we're going to flip the script and talk about the forwards that are near the top of your ranking. Just a quick little note that we mentioned last time, the difference between rankings versus a mock draft is important to discern that this is just a straight up draft board and it does not take into consideration what a team's needs might be.
Correct. Yeah, and what trades might happen, and none of that matters on this.
Nope. So we talked about the defensemen being a better class than usual last week. What about the forwards?
I don't think the forwards are as good as last year. The top two are exceptional, Macklin Celebrini and Demidov. But, I don't know if Demidov is going to go second because there's such a high price now on defensemen that, somebody could take Liv Shunoff and I wouldn't blink an eye and they could take him second. And that very well may happen. But just from the point of how do they play, Celebrini plays a complete game, so he'll start in the NHL. Demidov will play in the KHL next year, and that's fine. He'll probably play a couple seasons. I don't think he's a center. I really do think he's a winger, but we'll see how that progresses. It's early. And then after those two, then you get to your next tier, probably like 3 to 6.
So, speaking of those tiers, we are looking at your rankings, your 4.0 rankings, like we did last week from April 18th. There's a link to that list in the show notes. 21 of the 32 you had on your list are forward. So, there's a lot more of these guys than we talked about last week with the defensemen. You talked about Celebrini and Demidov as your 1-2. And so, but why did you pick him at 2 over those defensemen?
Because he's, his path is already a little harder. The MHL not particularly, but when he's going to play in the KHL, he's going to play amongst men. He's going to have to really, have to play like any seasoned pro to get ice time. So I think he's up for that. I think he's just got such a high motor, high skill level, the way he sees things and everything else, that sort of puts him in a different class of player. I don't think, again, you could always look at Kaprizov as sort of like the gold standard of a guy who you hadn't seen maybe since the World Juniors, goes over there, plays 2-3 years, then comes over here. He's just under 6 foot, but everything's great on him. I mean, the release on his shot is wicked. So I just, he can also shake and bake defenders. He knows how to get to the net, and that's a
Right.
big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, last week we kind of emphasized the defenseman and what does picking a defenseman with the Flyers top pick do for the team developmentally. Now let's talk about a forward. What does picking a forward at 12 do for the Flyers?
Well, I mean, probably makes more fans happy than if they take a defenseman. Not that that should matter, but I just feel like that's how the fan base is sort of leaning. Anytime you could take a very offensive player, there's going to be more excitement, right? There's no, there's more excitement for a Mitchkov than a Cam York, right? Both worthy of being first rounders, but that's just human nature. Uh, but I do think this is an opportunity for the Flyers to fill some gaps. They definitely have gaps in center, right wing. The left wing seems good for a while, but center and right wing they need help.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the next tier of guys, they're not going to be available for the Flyers, right?
No, they're not going to be available. I even in the best of circumstances for them, I don't think Eiserman falls to 12. So no, I don't think you'll see any of them. But in the tier after that, the third tier, that's when there's probably at least one that will slip through. Whether that's Berkeley Catton, whether that's Ginla, which I don't think he'll get past Calgary, to be honest. Uh, so maybe it's Catton, maybe it's Siliev, maybe because people don't want to take a chance on, even though he's a 6'7" guy with a lot of talent.
Before we get to those guys, let's
Yes.
talk about that tier that won't
Oh
drop,
yeah, the
just to
one.
make
Yeah,
sure
yeah.
it's clear who's in that tier. So, Caden Lindstrom, we haven't done a profile on him, mostly because he's out of reach of the Flyers and it's not realistic. But why is he ranked so high on so many people's lists?
Because he's got size and he's got some aggression, great goal scoring. Now the thing about Lidstrom is he's had some injuries and he has a little bit of a back injury. So
Right.
I may have him ranked higher than a few others, but I can't imagine he's going to fall out of the top 10. Weirder things have happened, but I don't think it will happen. But I'm just saying, if medicals don't come in great, then some teams might get scared off.
Right. And then the next guy is Consta Hellenius. We've talked about around U18s, and he is a rising player in a lot of people's minds. Cole Eiserman, you mentioned already. So those were your number 3, 4, and 6 on your list overall. Very likely out of reach of the Flyers unless something crazy happens, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even with Eiserman, talk is talk. Let's see what happens on draft day when all of a sudden, a GM is like, well, who's next on our list as a goal scorer? Call Eiserman's going to keep coming up. So that's why I don't think there's a chance he slips to 12. But he is going to slip a little because we all had him around second early in the year.
Right. Just unfortunately not enough. Now, you started talking about guys that are possibilities for the Flyers. A lot of people are getting excited about the potential of Berkeley Catton. You have him 10th on your list, a center in Spokane in the WHL. We did a full deep dive into him on April 11th. So
Hmm.
you can go listen to that show for more details on him. Link in the show notes to our spreadsheet with all the prospect profiles we've done. So you can get right to that episode. And I think that he is definitely becoming a popular guy amongst Flyers fans.
Yeah, and he should. I spoke to him after we did that profile, and what Catton told me that was very interesting was how he scouts players before the game. So he really goes through and does his own video scouting, especially for face-offs. So he could figure out how they work it and beat them on face-offs. And that's, for an 18-year-old, that's pretty next level. That's really good. So Fantilli told me that last year too. So there's some that do it, and I think the ones that do it are really students of the game, smart thinkers, besides, being offensively gifted like he is. So yeah, I could see why the Flyers would be high on him because yeah, if I wouldn't worry about if he's a center or a winger and if he's a smaller center. I throw all that aside right now. Everything else is great about him. So he'll find a spot in your lineup. That's really the main thing. Like I said, Travis Konecny got listed as a center on draft day too. He found a way in a lineup. They just do.
Yeah, yeah, they do. The next guy on your list now, remember this is from April 18th. I
Right.
bet he's going to go up on your next list is Ginla, who we've talked about maybe, in February when we talked about him, maybe he was in the Flyers zone, but now he's probably not, right?
Right. Yeah, and especially now, I mean, I forget what's Calgary picking, like 8th or 9th, something
Yeah,
like that.
somewhere in there.
So they're, if Tishigan like is there for them, they're going to take him. Like I know a lot of people that agree with that, and they might even trade up a spot to get him if another team says, "Well, if you don't want again, that kind of thing." So I don't think he will trickle down to the Flyers. He's done enough late in the season here to really tantalize everybody. So yeah, and like I've said before on other shows, like Sam Dickinson will not be there. This is just what I think of him, but I do think there's a chance he's moving up a little bit on my next ranking.
Right. So there's a couple more guys in this category we're gonna mention, and then kind of look at the reach picks or Florida eliminated early picks
Yeah.
options. There's this gray area between the two bunches of guys, and we're gonna get to them coming up next.
It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. Go back and bet the Knicks. I think they look pretty good now. What are you waiting for? Visit fanduel.com/locked on and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, heading into more of these Flyers zone picks. And one of the ones that we have talked about extremely recently is Liam Greentree. We talked about him on yesterday's show in our mailbag segment. Talked about him in depth on our April 18th show, a right winger from the Windsor Spitfires. And we talked about him as a good second choice, but he needs to work on his skating, right?
Yeah, definitely needs to work on his skating, but everything else he's pretty much got down. He's just a great passer. Coaching staff likes him to the point where he's one of those guys that's out on the ice end of games. Uh, he knows how to keep defenders at bay using his frame. He gets shots off in traffic. He does all those things right. He's a good power play distributor. All those things are really good. The skating needs to improve, but he would track as the kind of player that the Flyers would like and covet.
Absolutely. And Green Tree is 14th on your list. At 15 and 16, we have Michael Bransik Nygaard, who's a right winger from Norway playing in the Swedish league. And then we have a Russian Igor Chernyshov, who's a left winger who is likely moving up to the KHL more permanently in the next year, but has played with Dynamo Moscow.
Yeah, Nygaard first. I mean, he's got a really hard shot. I mean, hard. This kid's big and strong. It's a fluid, accurate wrist shot, especially on the power play, which is something the Flyers could use in the future. Uh, I've seen him do some clunky things like miss on a breakaway, but he's really smart. He's a good two-way player. That's why he keeps moving up the ladder in the men's leagues. As far as Chernisov, yeah, he's just got a great wrist shot. Another one is a really good skater. Cutting ability through traffic is good. He likes to give and go in the open ice. If he gets open ice, he could be a very exciting player. So he's a guy that you have to talk about and just say, okay, if we get him, is he the guy that potentially plays with Michkov someday? And maybe not the same year, maybe it's the year after. That's something where, because if you could draft that guy, then you don't have to go and try and spend all that money on Kaprizov. And I'm not saying he's Kaprizov, folks. Nobody's Kaprizov.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, if you can get somebody that tracks with Michkov in the draft, and all you have to do is wait an extra year rather than going and spending, 80 million or more in free agency, then you have to consider that.
Right. And, he's a little lower on your list and other people's lists in terms of relative to the 12 pick, but there is that advantage that you just mentioned to maybe taking a gander with him. I think that's kind of where the line is, where we now get into this is now more of a risk or a reach pick for that first pick the Flyers have, or if Florida suddenly gets eliminated early and are a higher pick than we would have expected, which I don't think is going to happen, but got to consider it nonetheless. So Trevor Connolly, we talked about related to U18s. little bit of a roller coaster because he had a successful tournament until a mistake in the gold medal game. Headed to Providence College, a little bit of a shaky background with some behavior issues, and so he's got a little bit of a mark against him here.
I mean, I don't think the misplay is as bad as people think because he was more than a point a game and really showed his stick handling ability and in being able to score against top talent. I think people have seen that he is definitely like a top 5 skill guy in this draft. So even if the Flyers took him at 12, you're getting a real value pick here because if there wasn't some of those other things you were talking about, he'd be a top 10 pick and they would never
Right.
have a shot at him. So I think there's that, and that's worth considering. Teddy Stiga had a great tournament. He's another guy that kept getting better and better as the year went on. He's just super smart and just knows how to play hockey. He could be, I think, an improvement or an improved version of like Joel Farabee, that kind of player.
I think that, we're going to do a deep dive into Teddy Stiga and Brody Zimmer in the next category,
Okay,
just to get like a national team development
okay.
program.
So we'll wait until then.
Little,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
After that, looking at those next ones, I don't think you go into Ryder Ritchie territory. But Sasha Bovair, I mean, as a center, if you're sold on him, and he's got some size. He had like 36 goals this year. Uh, didn't have a great playoff, but he did everything else was great. And if you even go back to like the Brick Invitational, where a lot of great players play, he had 4 goals in that tournament. He's a guy with a big ceiling, and he's also a guy that's got a frame that you could definitely put on some muscle. And he's a centerman. So I couldn't say that he's out of the possibility at 12 simply because if they think he's a second line center, it's worth the gamble.
Yeah, and you have him at 20 on this list. We
Yeah.
talked about him on January 18th. So if you want to learn more about him, you can listen to that show. Luke Misa, we haven't talked about really on the show here. We did talk about Emil Hemming related to U18s, and that he could potentially be moving up a little bit on people's lists.
Yeah. I mean, Hemming is like a physical guy. Like he really he could score, he skates well, but they definitely like his physicality. Misa, he's a really good playmaking forward. I really like him. I think everybody sort of dismisses him because of his brother, but because his brother, could be a top 5 pick next year. But he had 81 points. He had 3 out of 5 in the playoffs. There's a lot to like with him. He's not the biggest guy. What is he? 5'10", 165. So there's going to be some maturing there. So this is where I would go with the Florida pick on him. But he's got a nice speed burst. Uh, I think he's one of those guys that also gives what the defense takes him, and he's dangerous and creative. And those kinds of guys, like if you can get a creative guy like this, and again, I don't think he's a center. Uh,
Right.
you could be getting like the next Konechny, that kind of guy. I don't think he is Konechny, but there are some things he's ahead of Konechny at this age. So, that's what you have to sort of look at and say, as a flyer. That's I'm giving you this when I'm saying these comps because I don't give out comps. I'm just giving it to you as the Flyers lens. Like they look at this guy and say, he could be like that next guy for us, like that guy. That's all I'm trying to do with that.
Hemming, you had at 22. This is
Yeah.
where there's a little bit of a drop, and this is where we're firmly in Florida goes to the conference final, Stanley Cup final kind of territory here. Um, I think that we're going to talk about Beckett Sennecke next segment and really do a deep dive on him. You have him at 28.
And
We
he's
talked
moving
about
up. I'll tell you
yeah,
right now, he's moving up.
yeah, and Maxim Massey, we talked about him on March 28th. He's a right winger in the queue, which we've also talked about how challenging it is to kind of track prospects from the queue just because that league isn't as good a development
Yeah,
spot
I
as
mean,
it
look,
used to
Gendron's
be.
in the Mem Cup. He's probably going to score a lot in the Mem Cup, but then he couldn't get ice time with Lehigh, right? So there
Right.
is that disparity.
Exactly. So besides Sennecke, who we're going to talk about next, who are the other guys that you've got in that group that could be potential picks with the Florida pick?
Well, yeah. So Andrew Basha, he's a guy that's really good at pouncing on loose pucks, and I just like his overall game. He plays with Caden Lindstrom, so that's something where I think he has benefited from that. So that's something to sort of keep an eye out with. Um, Tanner Howe, we talked about. We did. There's a lot of nice things about him. I'm still on the fence whether he stays in this first round group of guys. He might, but there's definitely enough there where he would go early in the second, I believe. So you have to keep an eye on Brody Zemer. We'll talk about him. I think he's another one. Um, I think Adam Juracek is definitely, if Cole Hudson's there, I think you almost have to take him. Like, I just feel like you have to take that risk because, that's the way. I mean, again, 20 something picks later, but that's the way the Avalanche got Makar. They just had to take that chance. That's the way um, the Canadians got his brother. And I think the Canadians would try and get Cole as well. So that's something where, you might consider that. So, those are things. So those are some of the other guys. I'll even throw in Cole Baudin, who straddles first and second round, had a really good U18s.
So that's a little bit of a sneak preview of the next version of your list, perhaps?
Yeah, I when I get into a dark room and start really hashing it out, sometimes it changes a little bit because I start looking at this and I'm like, oh, but what about that? And literally, if somebody walked in, they would think I was a crazy person. But it's a little bit of a thing. Like I can tell you, Beckett, Seneca is definitely moving up as we're going to talk about.
Yeah, that is a good way to transition to that next segment. We'll get to that coming up next. Buying tickets to your favorite events like the NHL and NBA playoffs should not be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. It's an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip off. With killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying those coveted NBA playoff seats. My favorite part of the app is that it's great for getting notified about those last minute flash deals. And they let you save even more with zone deals, where you pick a section, let Game Time choose the seat. And with their all in pricing, there's no surprise fees at checkout. Your tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through email. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem with the code Locked On NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Russ. So Beckett Sennecke, 18-year-old right winger, 6'2", about 181 pounds. He's been ranked somewhere between 19 and 29 on all the different lists that I've looked at. Unfortunately, he was injured in game 6 of the previous series that Oshawa played in against North Bay. Oshawa has been facing London in the OHL finals, as we've been talking about. They're getting absolutely demolished by London, and maybe it's partially because Beckett isn't there.
I'm sure it's a big reason. I haven't really been able to watch more than highlights, but here's the thing on him though. He was 5'10" like last summer. So and Mitch Brown, somebody who I work with at EP Ringside, has done like a chart on growth, and with his chart, he exceeded growth 4 times more than most hockey players at this age.
Wow.
So he's had this big growth spurt, and so that's why I've kind of waited until this list to start putting him on there because I want to see, for lack of a better term, how's he doing with his new body? Even though he's had it for most of the year, and he's done really well. The playoffs, he's been great. I think the skating still needs some work. I think the edge work is there, and I think he occasionally gets ahead of the defense. He's got a great first step though, where with his crossover, if he can get a half step on you, he can get to the net. He knows how to do the rest. So I am really enamored with him now. Uh, there was a bit of an S storm the other day on Twitter when uh, Arpin Basu said that don't think that Montreal might not draft him fifth overall. So that has now created this whole thing because, like you said, we all have him like 19 to 28. Would Montreal really take him fifth overall? And like, I can't say no because I've always told you if that team says that's our guy in this draft, and that's their guy, they're going to take him
Yeah, Montreal
wherever.
does that.
Yeah, they're going to take him wherever and just say, we don't care what you think, Russ Cohen or anybody else. So I think it's a possibility, and it's not coloring my decision on him. I think this playoffs has really helped him. So I think he is moving up as a result. And now he has changed fields and, as he turned into a power forward in front of our eyes, but now he's got to get stronger too. Right. So you could get away with a lot in juniors with his abilities. But now that he's a power forward, I kind of have to wonder, like, how's that next step going to take him in the NHL?
Right. So, the injury aside, which I think the injury being this late in the season, like in the playoffs, should not affect his draft
No,
ranking too much. But that aside, with his bigger size, he's become even more of uh, just a play. Like he creates his own place,
he
right? He
does.
drives through himself. He's not going to really dish it off very much,
No,
right?
No, that's true, and so is a guy that can make things happen out there. I do like his deception on his wrist shot. I think that's really good. He knows how to also get shots through players that are screening the goalie. He's really smart that way. So I do think overall he's a goal scorer, and so that's something where, yeah, if you want to look at him in the 20s, if he happens to be there and Montreal's just bluffing, you could be laughing in a couple of years. But even if you thought about him at 12, I probably wouldn't kill you because, again, this is one of those things where it's kind of fluid. You know, you have to really do a deep dive on this guy now because he's changed.
Right. And I think for me, for a guy that is a pure scorer and isn't much of a passer in these circumstances, I worry about that just because at a certain point, for most of these kids, there's the rare exceptions, but for most of these kids, that skill kind of runs out at a certain level. People figure you out, and you can't get around these NHL defensemen. They figure out a way to stop you. And
Yeah,
so he's gotta round out his game a little bit more before he's ready, and he has to be able to play well with others,
yeah,
right?
I think that's true. I mean, he did have 41 assists this year, so it's not like he was, not able to dish off or do anything. I think there's, a little bit of like that Owen Tippettness in him where if he could
Right.
become a better playmaker, it would help his overall game and his points. I do think there's some of that.
Right, and so that's where I kinda see the risk factor being with him is that is he gonna be able to break through that wall? Now, plenty of guys do, so it's
Yeah.
not like it's unheard of, and you mentioned Owen Tippett, I think that's a great example, right? Where I think Owen Tippett has learned how to do his own thing while playing well with others, and we talked about him, earlier this week on the show as well. So I do think there is a lot of potential here. That's just the one little alarm bell I have in the back
Yeah, I
of my
mean, that's
head
fair.
about
And
him.
that's probably why I would wait till that next tier. But if somebody else bites on him, then so be it.
Then somebody else drops to the Flyers and it's a win-win, right?
Right. Right.
So as far as his development path, obviously, he's not a guy that's gonna go straight to the pros, but does he do the full another year of juniors and a year in the
Yeah.
AHL and then maybe having a shot or
Yeah, I
2
think
years
so.
in the AHL?
I think at least one, maybe two, and definitely another year in the OHL. I think simply because you look at it and you say, yeah, he's got to really, now he's 6'2", but he's 181. Now he's got to sort of get stronger and start playing that little bit of a different role as a stronger player does, like a Pierre-Luc Dubois. You see where he gets very physical. And I think,
Right.
the next version of him should be more physical.
Yeah, I think so. as well. Because if he has the size that he's using to create those chances, he can use it to do other things.
Right. Right. And that really could change his game a lot.
All right. Another player to add to my list that I will get attached to and sad about when they go elsewhere. But that's the name of the game
There's
with the
31 other
NH.
teams, Rachel. That's the way it
Yes,
goes.
I know. I know. The spreadsheet again with all of the guys that we've talked about in detail, as well as our overview shows. There's a separate tab for that uh, linked in the show notes, so you can keep track of it there. If there's somebody that we briefly mentioned today or that we haven't talked about yet, that you want to know about, let us know. We will add it to our list and talk about them on the show as we get closer to the draft. You can let us know via Twitter at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com or comment over on YouTube. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, SPORTSOLOGY.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today available on the free Fire TV channels app. Have a great day, everyone.